You're 14, old enough to live on your own, my mom said while packing my bags. Plus, my stepkids are more important. Her boyfriend laughed. Enjoy the real world, you rat. I didn't beg or cry, just walked out with nowhere to go. 10 years later, I'm a millionaire. She found me demanding surgery money for her boyfriend. You owe him after everything he did for you. I smiled and said something that made them both go pale. I was 12 when Greg moved in. Within a month, everything changed. Suddenly there were new rules, new priorities, and a very clear hierarchy in our house. Greg's 2 kids from his previous marriage, Brianna, 16, and Tyler, 15, became the golden children overnight. They got the bigger bedrooms, the newest clothes, and all of Mom's attention. I got relegated to the basement. It's temporary, Mom said when she helped me move my bed downstairs. Just until we figure out the sleeping arrangements. But temporary stretched into months, then years. The basement was cold, damp, and smelled like mildew. The ceiling was so low I had to duck in some places. But I made it work because I thought things would get better. They didn't. Greg made it clear from day one that I was an inconvenience. He'd roll his eyes when I came upstairs for dinner, make comments about extra mouths to feed, and constantly remind Mom that his kids needed things more than I did. When Brianna needed a laptop for school, they bought her a brand new MacBook. When I asked for help with my broken calculator for math class, Greg told me to figure it out. Mom always took his side. Greg's right, she'd say whenever I complained. His kids have been through a divorce. They need stability. When I pointed out that I'd been through their divorce too, watching my parents split when I was 8, she'd get annoyed. That's different. You're resilient. You always figure things out. At 13, I was doing my own laundry, making my own meals, and walking to school because there wasn't room in Greg's truck for all the kids. Brianna and Tyler got rides, got packed lunches, got help with homework. I got told to stop being needy when I asked for the same. The breaking point came on my 14th birthday. I woke up that morning hoping things might be different. Maybe Mom would remember, maybe she'd make my favorite breakfast, maybe we'd do something special like we used to before Greg. Instead, I found a note on the kitchen counter, gone to Tyler's baseball tournament. Back Sunday. Happy birthday, honey. My birthday was on Saturday. They'd be gone for 2 days. I spent my 14th birthday alone in that basement, eating cereal for dinner and trying not to cry. When they came back Sunday night, Mom didn't even mention missing it. She was too busy talking about Tyler's game-winning hit and how proud Greg was. That's when I realized I was invisible in my own home. School became my refuge. I threw myself into classes, joined every club that would have me, stayed late for any activity that meant not going home. My grades were perfect, not because anyone cared, but because succeeding felt like the only thing I could control. I got a job at 14, working weekends at a local grocery store. Lied about my age, said I was 16. The manager, Mr. Cruz, was kind but didn't ask too many questions when I told him I needed the work. I used the money for clothes, school supplies, and food. Mom never asked where I got any of it. By the time I turned 14, I'd been essentially living independently for 2 years. So when Mom sat me down that October day with my clothes in garbage bags, I wasn't entirely surprised. You're 14 now, she said, not making eye contact. Old enough to live on your own. Plus, my stepkids are more important. They need the space, the attention, the resources. You understand, right? I didn't understand. I was 14 years old. A child. But I also knew there was no point in arguing. Greg appeared in the doorway, grinning like he'd won the lottery. Enjoy the real world, you rat. He called out as I picked up my bags. I looked at my mom one last time, hoping she'd change her mind, hoping she'd remember that I was her son, that I needed her too. But she was already turning away, already moving on to Brianna's college application spread across the kitchen table. I walked out of that house carrying everything I owned in 2 garbage bags. Didn't beg. Didn't cry. Didn't give them the satisfaction. The first night was the worst. I'd tried sleeping in the park, but it was October and getting cold. A police officer found me around 2 a.m., asked questions I couldn't answer honestly. I told him I was waiting for a friend, that my ride was coming soon. He looked skeptical but moved on. I spent the next 3 days rotating between the library, fast food restaurants, and public bathrooms. Washed my face in McDonald's sinks, changed clothes in gas station restrooms, tried to look normal when I was anything but. On the 4th day, Mr. Cruz noticed something was off. Oscar, he said during my shift, I'd given him a fake name when I started, you look tired. Everything okay at home? I almost broke down right there in L7. Instead, I told him the truth. Not all of it, just enough. Said I'd had a fight with my family, that I needed a place to stay for a while. He studied my face for a long moment. How old are you really? 16, I lied. Try again. 14. He was quiet for a while, restocking shelves while I waited for him to fire me, to call social services, to send me back to Mom and Greg. Instead, he made me an offer. My brother owns an apartment building across town. Nothing fancy, but there's a studio unit in the basement. Needs work, painting, cleaning, some repairs. You do the work, you can stay there. Keep your job here, help out with maintenance on weekends. Deal? I nodded so fast I probably looked ridiculous. The apartment was tiny, basically a large closet with a kitchenette and bathroom. But it was mine. No one could kick me out, no one could make me feel unwanted, no one could treat me like I didn't matter. I threw myself into fixing it up. Painted the walls, cleaned every surface, learned basic plumbing and electrical work from YouTube videos at the library. Made it a home. School was trickier. I'd been going to the same high school, but now I was living in a different district. Managed to keep attending by using my old address on paperwork and taking 2 buses each way. Told my guidance counselor I was living with relatives after family problems. She seemed to buy it. The hardest part wasn't the physical challenges, it was the emotional ones. At 14, I was completely on my own. No parent to call when I was sick, no family dinners, no one to help with homework or worry when I was late coming home. Some nights, the loneliness was overwhelming. But I survived. More than that, I started to thrive. Without the constant stress of Greg's criticism and Mom's indifference, my grades improved even more. I discovered I was actually smart, really smart. Won academic competitions, got recognition from teachers, earned scholarships to summer programs. Work became my training ground. Mr. Cruz taught me about business, about managing money, about treating people with respect. His brother, Alejandro, taught me construction skills, property management, basic accounting. I absorbed everything like a sponge. By 16, I was managing 3 other part-time workers at the grocery store. By 17, I was helping Alejandro renovate apartments in exchange for a bigger place and a small salary. I learned every aspect of property management, from fixing leaky faucets to screening tenants to reading financial statements. High school ended with a full scholarship to State University. Business major, accounting minor. I moved into the dorms but kept working for Alejandro on weekends and summers. College was where everything clicked. I understood business intuitively, probably because I'd been running my own life like a business since I was 14. Every decision was calculated, every expense justified, every risk carefully weighed. I started small. Used my savings to buy a rundown duplex near campus with Alejandro co-signing the loan. Fixed it up myself, rented one side to students, lived in the other. Used the rental income to buy another property, then another. Most adults made from their jobs. By graduation, I had 12 properties and a property management company with 3 employees. My professors were impressed. My classmates thought I was lucky. I knew it was just what happened when you had no safety net, you either built your own or you fell. After graduation, I moved to the city and scaled up. Bought apartment buildings, office complexes, retail spaces. Started a construction company to handle renovations in-house. Hired Alejandro as my first foreman. The money came faster than I'd ever imagined. By 25, I was worth $2 million. By 28, it was $8 million. Real millionaire, not fake it for social media millionaire. Actual assets, actual cash flow, actual employees depending on me. Success felt good, but it also felt lonely. I'd built this empire with no family to share it with, no one who'd known me before the money. I dated occasionally but had trouble trusting people's motives. When you grow up unwanted, you assume everyone might leave eventually. I went to therapy starting at 26. Dr. Talia Morgan helped me understand that my childhood had shaped me in both positive and negative ways. The independence and work ethic were assets. The inability to trust, the fear of abandonment, the need to control everything, those needed work. You've accomplished something remarkable, she told me during one session. But success doesn't heal abandonment wounds. Only relationships can do that. I was working on it. Slowly building friendships with employees who'd become family, with Alejandro and his wife who treated me like a son, with neighbors and community members who knew me as a person, not a bank account. Then, on a Tuesday morning in March, my secretary buzzed me. "There's a woman here to see you," Annika said carefully. "Says she's your mother." I hadn't heard from Mom in 10 years. Not once. No birthday calls, no Christmas cards, no checking to see if I was alive or dead. I'd wondered sometimes if she ever thought about me, if she ever regretted choosing Greg's kids over her own son. Now I was about to find out. "Send her in," I said. The woman who walked into my office looked older, harder. Mom was 54 now, with gray streaks in her hair and lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. She looked around my office, the mahogany desk, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the awards on the walls, with obvious surprise. "Noah?" she said uncertainly. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Please, sit." She perched on the edge of the chair like she might need to run. I heard you'd done well for yourself. I wasn't sure if it was true. What can I do for you, Mom? She flinched at the formal tone but pressed on. I need your help, Noah. It's Greg, he needs surgery. Heart surgery. The insurance won't cover all of it, and we don't have the money. I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. How much? $50,000. The words came out in a rush. I know it's a lot, but you owe him after everything he did for you. He gave you a home, fed you, treated you like his own. I held up a hand to stop her. The audacity was breathtaking. Everything he did for me? Yes. He could have refused to let you stay when we got together. Could have made me choose between you and him. Instead, he welcomed you into our family. He called me a rat, I said quietly. Mom's face flushed. That was just. He has a rough way of speaking sometimes. But he cared about you. We both did. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a photograph. It was from my high school graduation, me alone in my cap and gown, no family in sight because no one had come. I'd asked a random stranger to take the picture. This is from my graduation, I said, sliding it across the desk. Notice anything missing? She picked up the photo, and I saw her hands shake slightly. We wanted to be there. But Tyler had a tournament that same weekend, and Greg couldn't miss his game. There's always an excuse, isn't there? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city I now owned a small piece of. Do you know where I slept the night you kicked me out? You went to a friend's house. I slept in the park. Then in a storage unit. Then in a basement apartment that I paid for by working 40 hours a week while finishing high school. I turned back to face her. She was staring at the photo, tears starting to form. I was 14 years old, Mom. A child. And you chose a man you'd known for 2 years over the son you'd raised for 14. It wasn't like that. Then tell me what it was like. Because from where I sat, it looked like I was disposable. Like Greg's kids mattered and I didn't. Like you were embarrassed by your own son. She was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. I thought you'd be fine. You were always so independent, so capable. I thought you could handle it. I was independent because I had to be. Because no one was taking care of me. I sat back down, suddenly feeling exhausted. You want to know what Greg did for me? He taught me that family is conditional. That love has to be earned. That I couldn't depend on anyone but myself. That's not true, isn't it? When's the last time you called me? Sent a birthday card? Asked if I was okay? She couldn't answer that. I opened my checkbook and wrote out a check for $50,000. Her eyes widened as I ripped it out and held it up. This is what you came for, right? Money for Greg's surgery? She nodded eagerly, reaching for it. I tore the check in half. What are you doing? She gasped. Teaching you the same lesson you taught me. I tore it into smaller pieces, letting them fall into the wastebasket. That family is conditional. That help has to be earned. That you can't depend on anyone but yourself. Her face went pale, then red. You're being cruel. Greg could die without this surgery. Then you'd better figure it out, I said, standing up. Just like you told me to do when I was 14. She stared at me in shock, like she couldn't believe I was capable of refusing her. Like she'd expected me to hand over the money gratefully, thankful for the chance to help the people who'd abandoned me. But you're successful now. You have so much money. $50,000 is nothing to you. You're right. It is nothing to me. But principle is everything. I walked to my office door and opened it. You made your choice 10 years ago. You chose Greg and his kids over your own son. Now live with the consequences. She stood up slowly, clutching her purse. I'm your mother. No, I said quietly. You're the woman who gave birth to me. There's a difference. As she walked past me toward the door, she stopped. What if I said I was sorry? What if I admitted I made mistakes? I looked at her for a long moment. Part of me, the 14-year-old boy who'd cried himself to sleep in that basement, wanted to hear those words so badly. Wanted to believe she finally understood what she'd done. But I was 28 now. I'd built a life, a business, a future without her. I'd learned what real family looked like from Alejandro and his wife, from Mr. Cruz, from the people who'd chosen to care about me when they didn't have to. Then you'd be about 14 years too late, I said. She left without another word. I closed the door and sat back down at my desk, hands shaking slightly. Called Dr. Morgan and made an emergency appointment. Knew I'd need help processing what had just happened. That evening, I had dinner with Alejandro and his family like I did every Tuesday. His wife Daniela had made enchiladas, and their kids, now in college, were home for spring break. They argued about sports and politics and who had to do dishes, normal family stuff that I'd never experienced growing up. You're quiet tonight, mijo, Daniela said, using the nickname she'd given me years ago. Everything okay? I told them about Mom's visit, about the money, about my response. Expected them to tell me I'd been too harsh, that I should have helped anyway. Instead, Alejandro nodded approvingly. Good. You don't owe those people anything. But it felt. I struggled to find the words. I could have saved a man's life, and I chose not to. What does that make me? Daniela reached across the table and squeezed my hand. It makes you human. You're not responsible for fixing the problems of people who hurt you. Besides, Alejandro added, I guarantee that woman has other options. She came to you because she thought you'd be easy money. When people are truly desperate, they don't lead with guilt trips. He was right. If Greg really needed life-saving surgery, there were medical loans, payment plans, fundraising options. Mom had come to me first because she thought I owed them something. 3 weeks later, I found out Alejandro was right. Annika forwarded me a social media post from Brianna, Mom's stepdaughter, celebrating Greg's successful surgery. Apparently, they'd qualified for a medical loan after all. The whole "you owe him" speech had been manipulation, not desperation. I wasn't surprised. Just disappointed that even after 10 years, Mom was still choosing manipulation over honesty. 6 months later, I got a letter forwarded through my lawyer. Mom again, this time claiming she'd had time to think about our conversation, that she realized she'd been wrong, that she wanted to rebuild our relationship. I read it twice, then filed it away. Maybe someday I'd be ready for that conversation. Maybe not. But I'd learned that healing doesn't require forgiveness, and success doesn't obligate you to rescue the people who gave up on you. I was 30 when I met Leah at a charity event I was sponsoring. She was a social worker who ran programs for homeless youth, kids aging out of foster care, teenagers in situations like mine had been. She didn't know who I was initially, just knew I was the guy writing checks to her organization. Why this cause? She asked during our first coffee date. I told her my story. Not all of it, just enough. She listened without judgment, asked thoughtful questions, didn't try to fix me or tell me how I should feel. You could have become bitter, she said when I finished. A lot of people would have. Instead, you're helping kids who remind you of yourself. That says something about who you are. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. The wedding was small. Alejandro walked me down the aisle since I had no father figure. Daniela helped plan everything. Leah's family welcomed me like I'd always belonged. It was everything I'd never known I wanted. We bought a house in the suburbs, started talking about kids. I was terrified of becoming a parent, afraid I'd repeat my mother's mistakes, but Dr. Morgan helped me work through those fears. You know what not to do, she reminded me. That's more than most parents start with. Leah got pregnant when I was 32. When she told me, I cried for an hour. Happy tears, grateful tears, overwhelmed tears. This child would never wonder if they were wanted, never sleep in a basement, never feel invisible in their own home. I was holding my son, we named him Elijah, when Annika called. Mom had somehow gotten my new number, was calling the office demanding to speak to me. Something about wanting to meet her grandson. I looked down at Eli, sleeping peacefully in my arms, and felt a surge of protective anger. This woman who'd abandoned her own child thought she deserved access to his child? Who'd taught me that family was conditional now wanted unconditional access to my family. Tell her no, I said. And block the number. Leah looked at me questioningly from her hospital bed. She gave up the right to be a grandmother when she chose not to be a mother, I explained. Some people might call that harsh. I call it boundaries. I call it protecting my son from people who've proven they can't be trusted. I call it breaking the cycle. Eli is 5 now, and he's never met my mother. Probably never will. He has Alejandro and Daniela as honorary grandparents, Leah's parents who adore him, chosen family who show up consistently and love him unconditionally. He'll grow up knowing he's wanted, knowing he matters, knowing that family is about choice and commitment, not just biology. He'll never wonder if he's good enough because I'll make sure he knows he is, every single day. Last month, I got another letter from Mom. This one came through 3 different lawyers, each one more expensive than the last. She's claiming grandparents' rights, threatening to sue for visitation. My lawyer laughed when I showed it to him. She abandoned you as a minor. No court in the country is going to grant her access to your child. I'm not worried about the legal threats. I have resources now, good lawyers, documentation of everything. What bothers me is that she's still trying to take what she wants instead of earning what she needs. Still trying to manipulate instead of making amends. Still choosing the easy path over the right one. But that's her choice to make. Just like it was her choice to pack my bags when I was 14. Just like it was her choice to prioritize Greg's kids over her own son. I've made my choices too. To build something better than what I came from. To surround myself with people who choose to love me every day. To be the parent I never had. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if she'd chosen differently that October day when I was 14. If she'd stood up to Greg, fought for me, remembered that I was her child too. But then I look at the life I've built, the business, the family, the people who depend on me, and I realize that her worst decision became my biggest opportunity. Her abandonment taught me self-reliance. Her rejection taught me to value the people who choose to stay. I wouldn't change any of it. Well, maybe one thing. I'd go back and tell that 14-year-old boy sleeping in the park that he's going to be okay. More than okay. That the people who matter will show up eventually, that he's stronger than he knows, that walking away with dignity was the bravest thing he could have done. That he doesn't need anyone's permission to build a life worth living. And that someday, he'll be grateful for every lesson, even the painful ones. Especially the painful ones. 5 years passed in relative peace. Eli started kindergarten, Leah took a promotion to director of her organization, and my business expanded into commercial development. Life felt stable, predictable, good. Then my phone rang on a Tuesday morning in September. Mr. Delgado? The voice was unfamiliar, professional. This is Detective Carter with Metro Police. I'm calling about your mother, Karen Lewis. My blood went cold. What about her? She's been arrested for harassment and stalking. The victim is a young man named Brandon Lee. During questioning, your name came up repeatedly. She claims you'll vouch for her character and pay her bail. I almost laughed. Almost. Detective, I haven't spoken to my mother in 7 years. I have a restraining order preventing her from contacting me. Whatever she's told you about our relationship is a lie. There was a pause. Sir, she has your business cards in her wallet. Says you're her successful son who owns half the city. She probably got those from my company website. We're not in contact. Would you be willing to come in and give a statement? This Mr. Lee's situation sounds remarkably similar to what you described in that podcast years ago. I'd forgotten about the podcast. It had aired when I was 24, just as my business was taking off. I'd done it to help other kids who'd been abandoned, never thinking it would come back to haunt me. I'll be there this afternoon. The police station was exactly what I expected, fluorescent lights, beige walls, the smell of bad coffee and desperation. Detective Carter was a tired-looking woman in her 50s who reminded me of a high school principal. Your mother has quite a file, she said, sliding a folder across the table. Harassment complaints dating back 3 years. Different victims, but the pattern is always the same. I opened the file and felt sick. Police reports from a grocery store clerk, a bank teller, a restaurant manager. All young men, all in their 20s, all successful despite difficult backgrounds. Mom had approached each one claiming to be his long-lost mother, demanding money, becoming increasingly aggressive when refused. She's targeting people who remind her of you, Detective Carter said. Same general appearance, same age range, same success stories. Mr. Lee is the first one to press charges. What exactly did she do to him? Showed up at his workplace claiming to be his mother. When he said he'd never seen her before, she became violent. Threw a coffee pot, screamed that he was ungrateful, threatened to ruin his business. Security had to escort her out. I studied Brandon Lee's photo. Asian American, about 25, serious expression. Could have been any young professional. Nothing like me except the age and apparent success. She's been doing this for 3 years? That we know of. Could be longer. The pattern suggests she's trying to replace the relationship she lost with you. That evening, I told Leah everything. She listened with growing horror as I described the police report, the other victims, the escalating pattern of Mom's behavior. She's clearly having some kind of mental health crisis, Leah said, holding Eli on her lap while he colored. This isn't normal grief or regret. This is delusional behavior. I feel responsible, I admitted. If I'd handled things differently 7 years ago. Stop. Leah's voice was firm. You set appropriate boundaries with someone who hurt you. Her response to those boundaries is not your fault. But I couldn't shake the guilt. That night, I called Dr. Morgan for the first time in 2 years. Noah, she said warmly. How are you handling this news? I keep thinking I should have seen this coming. Should have done something to prevent it. What could you have done? You had no contact with her. You couldn't have known she was developing this pattern. But these other men are victims of her choices, not yours. You're not responsible for your mother's mental health or her criminal behavior. The conversation helped, but I still felt unsettled. That weekend, I did something I'd never done before. I researched my mother online. What I found was disturbing. Facebook posts over the years about her missing son who'd been brainwashed by lawyers and stolen from his family. Photos of random young men with captions like "looks just like my Noah and could this be him?" Comments on news articles about successful young entrepreneurs, claiming they might be her son. She'd created an entire fantasy where I was missing rather than choosing to be absent. Where she was a grieving mother rather than someone who'd abandoned her child. I showed the post to my lawyer, Jamal, who'd handled the original restraining order. This is useful, he said grimly. Shows a pattern of delusion that supports the criminal charges. But Noah, there's something else we need to discuss. He pulled out a legal document. She's filed a lawsuit against you. Claims you've been defaming her character, interfering with her relationships, causing her emotional distress. On what basis? The podcast from years ago. She's claiming it was false and damaged her reputation. I read through the lawsuit with growing disbelief. Mom was claiming I'd lied about being abandoned, That the whole story was fabricated for sympathy and financial gain. She wanted $2 million in damages. This is insane, I said. I have documentation of everything. School records showing my address changes, employment records from when I was 14, witness statements. I know. It's a frivolous lawsuit that won't go anywhere. But it shows how desperate she's become. The lawsuit made local news. Local real estate mogul sued by mother over abandonment claims. The reporter had done her homework, finding court records that supported my version of events, but the damage was done. Suddenly, my private family trauma was public entertainment. Leah fielded calls from reporters wanting my response. Eli's school had to increase security after someone tried to approach him claiming to be his grandmother. I had to hire private security for the first time in my life. This is exactly what she wants, Leah said after a particularly difficult day. She's forcing herself back into your life through chaos and publicity. She was right. Mom couldn't get my attention through normal channels, so she'd created a crisis that demanded my response. A week later, Brandon Lee called my office. Mr. Delgado? This is Brandon Lee. I'm the guy your mother. He trailed off. I know who you are. I'm sorry about what happened to you. Actually, I was hoping we could meet. I've been following your story in the news, and I think we might be able to help each other. We met at a coffee shop downtown. Brandon was smaller than his photo suggested, with nervous energy and intelligent eyes. He'd grown up in foster care, built a successful marketing company from nothing, and had no family beyond chosen friends. When your mother first approached me, I thought maybe she was confused, he said. Maybe she really had lost a son and was confused about identities. But then she started getting specific details about my life that she shouldn't have known. What kind of details? My company's revenue, my personal address, my daily routines. She'd been researching me for weeks before making contact. This wasn't random or delusional, it was calculated. That changed everything. If Mom was researching her victims, learning their vulnerabilities, planning her approaches, this wasn't mental illness, it was predatory behavior. There's something else, Brandon continued. I hired a private investigator after the police incident. Your mother has been involved in similar situations in 3 other cities over the past 5 years. Always targeting successful young men with difficult backgrounds. He slid a folder across the table. Police reports from Chicago, Phoenix, and Denver. Different names, same pattern. In each case, Mom had eventually moved on when the heat got too intense. Why are you telling me this? Because you're the original target. She's been using your story, your success, your abandonment, your podcast, to identify and manipulate other victims. We think she's been making money from some of them. The private investigator's report was thorough and damning. Mom had convinced at least 3 men to give her money before they realized she wasn't actually their mother. Small amounts, a few thousand here and there, but enough to live on while she moved from city to city. I felt sick reading it. My story, my trauma, had become her business model. That night, I called Detective Carter. We've been wondering about those other cities, she said when I told her about the report. This gives us enough to contact other jurisdictions, possibly file federal charges. Federal charges? Crossing state lines to commit fraud. Pattern of identity theft. This is bigger than one harassment case now. Within a month, Mom was facing charges in 4 states. The frivolous lawsuit against me was dismissed when her lawyer withdrew after realizing the extent of her criminal activity. The media coverage shifted from family drama to serial scammer exposed. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 months later, I got a call from a reporter in Ohio. Mr. Delgado, I'm investigating claims that your mother was involved in an elder abuse scheme here in Columbus. A 70-year-old man says she convinced him she was his estranged daughter and took $15,000 from him. The story kept growing. Mom hadn't just been targeting young men who reminded her of me, she'd been running multiple identity scams, convincing elderly people she was their lost family member, taking money from vulnerable people who were desperate for connection. The final count was staggering, 12 victims across 6 states, over $100,000 stolen, and a pattern of behavior dating back 7 years. She started this right after you refused her the surgery money, Detective Carter told me during one of our final conversations. Like your rejection broke something in her, and she decided if you wouldn't be her successful son, she'd find replacements who would pay. The trial was a media circus. I testified about my childhood, about the abandonment, about her demands for money. The other victims testified about her lies, her manipulation, her threats when they refused to help. Mom's defense was that she was mentally ill, that grief over losing her son had caused a breakdown. Her lawyer painted her as a tragic figure, a mother driven to desperation by the loss of her child. The prosecutor countered with evidence of premeditation, the research she'd done on victims, the careful planning of each approach, the way she'd moved to new cities when investigations got too close. I watched her during the trial, this woman who'd given birth to me but never really been my mother. She looked smaller than I remembered, frail and confused. Sometimes I could almost believe her lawyer's story about mental illness and grief. Then I'd remember Brandon Lee, the elderly man in Ohio, all the other victims she'd traumatized in pursuit of money that wasn't hers. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. 15 years in federal prison. As they led her away, Mom looked directly at me for the first time since the trial began. "This is all your fault," she mouthed silently. Even then, even after everything, she couldn't take responsibility for her own choices. That night, Leah found me sitting in Eli's room, watching him sleep. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly. Relieved. Guilty. Sad. Angry. I struggled to find the right words. I spent so many years thinking she was just selfish and manipulative. Finding out she was actually criminal. It's different. Does it change anything for you? I considered that. No. I think that's what surprises me most. Whether she abandoned me out of selfishness or mental illness or just plain cruelty, the result was the same. A 14-year-old boy ended up homeless and alone. And that boy grew up to be an incredible man, Leah said, putting her arm around me. Because other people stepped in. Because Alejandro and Daniela and Mr. Cruz chose to care about a random kid. Because I got lucky. Luck had nothing to do with it. You made good choices when you could have made bad ones. You worked when you could have given up. You built instead of destroyed. Eli stirred in his sleep, and I adjusted his blanket. This little boy would never wonder if he was wanted. Would never sleep in a basement or eat peanut butter for every meal or figure out how to survive on his own at 14. "I want to do something," I said suddenly. "What kind of something?" "A foundation. For kids aging out of foster care, kids who've been abandoned, kids like I was. Real support, housing, education, job training, therapy. Everything I had to figure out on my own." Leah smiled. "I think that's perfect." We launched the Second Chance Foundation a year later. Started with a dozen kids, expanded to 50, then 100. We provided transitional housing, college scholarships, job training programs, and most importantly, adult mentors who actually cared. Alejandro became our first volunteer coordinator. Mr. Cruz, now retired, taught financial literacy classes. Dr. Morgan provided therapy services. Brandon Lee joined our board and helped with marketing. By the time Eli turned 10, we'd helped over 500 young people transition to independent adulthood. Kids who might have ended up homeless, addicted, or criminal instead graduated from college, started businesses, built families. "You're giving them what you needed," Leah observed after a particularly successful graduation ceremony. "I'm giving them what everyone deserves," I corrected. "A chance to figure out who they want to be instead of just surviving who they are." Last month, I got a letter from prison. Mom again, after 5 years of silence. This time was different, though. No demands, no guilt trips, no manipulation. Just an apology. She wrote about the therapy she'd been getting in prison, about finally understanding what she'd done to me and to her other victims. About taking responsibility for choices she'd been blaming on everyone else for years. She didn't ask for money or visits or forgiveness. Just said she was sorry and that she understood if I never wanted to hear from her again. I showed the letter to Dr. Morgan, who I still see occasionally for maintenance sessions. "How does it make you feel?" she asked. "Empty," I said honestly. 10 years ago, I would have given anything to hear those words. Now, it's just too late. "Do you think you'll respond?" "I don't know. Part of me thinks I should, for closure. But another part of me thinks some doors should stay closed once you've built a new house. I still haven't decided." The letter sits in my desk drawer next to the photo from my high school graduation, the before and after of my life without her. Eli is 12 now, the same age I was when Greg moved in and everything changed. He's confident in a way I never was, secure in his place in our family, surrounded by people who choose him every day. Sometimes I try to imagine what my life would have been like if Mom had made different choices. If she'd stood up to Greg, fought for me, remembered that I was her child too. But then I look at what I've built, the marriage, the family, the business, the foundation, and I realize that her worst decision became my greatest opportunity. Her abandonment taught me self-reliance. Her rejection taught me to value the people who choose to stay. I wouldn't change any of it. Well, maybe one thing. I'd go back and tell that 14-year-old boy sleeping in the park that he's going to be okay. More than okay. That the people who matter will show up eventually, that he's stronger than he knows, that walking away with dignity was the bravest thing he could have done. That he doesn't need anyone's permission to build a life worth living. That someday, he'll understand the difference between the family you're born into and the family you create. And that the family you create, built on choice, commitment, and unconditional love, is always stronger than the one that chooses to let you go. But life has a way of forcing decisions you're not ready to make. 2 months after receiving Mom's letter, I got another call that would change everything. This time, it wasn't about her crimes or lawsuits or manipulation. This time, it was about Greg. "Mr. Delgado?" The voice belonged to a nurse at Memorial Hospital. "I'm calling because you're listed as an emergency contact for Gregory Lewis." I almost hung up. There must be a mistake. I'm not, sir. Mr. Lewis was brought in unconscious after a heart attack. He's in critical condition. Before he lost consciousness, he kept repeating your name and phone number. Said you were his stepson. The irony was staggering. Greg, who called me a rat and laughed as I walked out with garbage bags, had apparently listed me as his emergency contact. The man who'd convinced my mother I was disposable now wanted me to show up in his moment of crisis. Is anyone else there with him? I asked. No, sir. We've tried reaching other family members, but the numbers we have are disconnected or out of service. I thought about hanging up. Thought about letting Greg face this alone, the way he'd made me face everything alone when I was 14. But something, maybe curiosity, maybe closure, maybe just basic human decency, made me drive to the hospital. Greg looked terrible. Pale, thin, hooked up to machines that beeped and hummed around his bed. He was conscious when I arrived, his eyes widening when he saw me. Noah, he whispered. You came. The nurse said you listed me as your emergency contact. He nodded weakly. Only number I remembered. Been carrying it in my wallet for years. Where's everyone else? Brianna? Tyler? My mother? Greg's expression crumpled. Gone. All gone. Karen's in prison, I'm sure you know about that. Brianna moved to California, won't talk to me. Tyler died 3 years ago. Overdose. I felt a shock of unexpected grief. Tyler, my stepbrother who'd slammed doors in my face and called me names, was dead. He'd only been 31. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. He started using after Karen got arrested, Greg continued. Couldn't handle the shame, the media attention. I tried to help him, but he trailed off, staring at the ceiling. We sat in silence for a while. This man who'd been such a presence in my teenage years, who'd seemed so powerful and intimidating, now looked like what he'd always been, a broken person who'd made broken choices. Why did you do it? I asked finally. Do what? Kick me out. Treat me like I didn't matter. I was just a kid, Greg. He closed his eyes. Because you reminded me of everything I'd failed at. You were smart, hardworking, determined. Made my own kids look lazy by comparison. Made me look like a bad father. So you decided to get rid of me instead of stepping up as a parent? I convinced myself you'd be better off without us. That you were tough enough to make it on your own. He opened his eyes and looked directly at me. I was wrong. About everything. Yes, you were. I know you probably hate me. I don't hate you, Greg. I don't feel anything about you. You were a chapter in my story that ended a long time ago. He winced at that, and I realized my indifference was probably more painful than hatred would have been. I need to tell you something, he said. About Karen. About what really happened when we left you. I waited. It wasn't her idea. It was mine. The words came out in a rush. I told her she had to choose between you and me. Said I wouldn't marry her if you stayed. She cried for days, but I wore her down. Made her believe you'd be fine, that you were better off without us. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All these years, I'd blamed my mother for choosing Greg over me. But Greg had orchestrated the whole thing, had manipulated her into abandoning her own child. She wanted to take you with us, he continued. Wanted to find a bigger place where all the kids could fit. I said no. Said it was me or you, and she chose me. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, the city stretched endlessly, the empire I'd built visible in the skyline. All of it constructed on the foundation of abandonment, of learning to rely only on myself. Why are you telling me this now? Because she's been taking the blame for 15 years, and it's eating her alive. Because you deserve to know the truth. Because I'm dying, and I can't take this to my grave. You're not dying. The nurse said. I am dying, he said matter-of-factly. The heart attack was just the latest. I've got maybe 6 months, according to the doctors. Cancer. Started in my lungs, spread everywhere. I turned back to face him. What do you want from me, Greg? Nothing. I don't deserve anything from you. I just wanted you to know that your mother. She loved you. She fought for you longer than I let anyone see. I broke her down, made her feel like she had to choose, and then I made sure she chose wrong. The machines continued their electronic symphony around us. Somewhere down the hall, a baby was crying. Life continuing its messy, complicated dance while Greg and I sat in this sterile room confronting the wreckage of our shared past. I need to go, I said finally. Will you? Will you tell Karen? About Tyler, about me being sick? She deserves to know, even if she can't do anything about it from prison. I considered lying, saying I'd pass along the message. Instead, I told him the truth. I haven't spoken to her since the trial. I don't plan to start now. He nodded, accepting that. I understand. Just. Thank you for coming. For listening. I know it was more than I deserved. I left without saying goodbye, drove home in a daze. Leah was in the kitchen making dinner when I walked in, Eli at the table doing homework. "How was your day?" she asked, then stopped when she saw my face. "What happened?" I told her everything. About Greg's call, his confession, Tyler's death, the cancer diagnosis. She listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from shock to anger to sadness. "He manipulated your mother into abandoning you, and now he wants you to feel sorry for him?" she said when I finished. "I don't think he wants my sympathy. I think he just wanted to confess. Does it change how you feel about your mother?" I thought about that. It explains some things. But it doesn't excuse them. She was an adult. She could have said no, could have fought harder, could have chosen her child over a man she'd known for 2 years. But it does shift some of the blame. Maybe. I don't know. Does it matter now? Leah was quiet for a moment. It might matter to her. That night, I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about Mom in prison, probably blaming herself for choices that had been orchestrated by someone else. Thinking about Tyler, dead at 31, another casualty of Greg's manipulation. Thinking about Greg himself, alone in that hospital room, finally telling the truth when it was too late to matter. The next morning, I did something I'd sworn I'd never do. I called the prison. It took an hour of transfers and holds and bureaucratic runarounds, but eventually I was connected to a social worker who could arrange a phone call with an inmate. "Inmate Lewis has you on her approved contact list," the woman said. "Has since she arrived. Never thought you'd actually call, though." 3 days later, I sat in my office staring at the phone, waiting for the call to come through. When it finally rang, I almost didn't answer. "Noah?" Mom's voice was smaller than I remembered, uncertain. "Hello, Mom." A long pause. I got your letter. The one saying you'd received my apology. I never expected you to call." "I didn't call about your letter," I said. "I called about Greg." I told her everything, the heart attack, the cancer diagnosis, the confession about manipulating her into abandoning me. I told her about Tyler's death, about Brianna's estrangement, about Greg dying alone with only my phone number in his wallet. She cried throughout most of it. Quiet, heartbroken sobs that I could hear clearly through the phone. "I should have been stronger," she said when I finished. "Should have told him no, should have fought for you harder. But he made it seem like loving him meant not loving you, and I was so afraid of being alone again. You weren't alone. You had me." "I know. I know that now. I've had 5 years to think about all the ways I failed you, all the times I chose convenience over courage." We talked for almost an hour. Not about reconciliation or forgiveness or building a relationship. Just about the truth, all of it, finally laid bare after 15 years of secrets and lies. "Are you going to see him again?" she asked as our time ran out. "I don't know. Probably not." "Will you? If something happens to him, will you let me know? I know I don't have the right to ask, but he was Tyler's father, and despite everything, we did love each other once." "I'll think about it." "Thank you. And Noah? I'm proud of you. Of the man you became, of the life you built, of how you survived what we put you through. I know I don't get to be proud, but I am anyway." After we hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, watching the city beyond my windows. Thinking about choices and consequences, about forgiveness and boundaries, about the complicated nature of family and love and redemption. Greg died 6 weeks later. I found out from an obituary in the newspaper, Gregory Lewis, 58, died peacefully at Memorial Hospital after a brief illness. No mention of surviving family, no details about his life beyond basic biographical facts. I drove to the funeral home, not sure why. There were maybe a dozen people there, former co-workers, a few neighbors, strangers who'd known him in some small way. No family. No one who'd really loved him. The pastor gave a generic eulogy about a man he'd clearly never met. Talked about Greg being reunited with his beloved son Tyler and finding peace. I wondered if Tyler had found peace, or if he died angry and broken like so many people caught in Greg's orbit. Afterward, the funeral director approached me. "Are you family?" he asked. "No," I said. "Just someone who knew him once." He left instructions that if a Noah Delgado attended his funeral, I should give you this. He handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with shaky handwriting, Greg's final message to me. "Noah, if you're reading this, it means you came to my funeral, which is more kindness than I deserved. I've been thinking about what to say to you, how to apologize for everything I took from you, everything I cost you. But I realize that you don't need my apology. You already won. You built a life, a family, a legacy that has nothing to do with me or Karen or the mess we made of your childhood. You became the man you were always meant to be, not because of us, but in spite of us. I hope someday you can forgive your mother. Not for my sake, but for yours. She made terrible choices, but they came from weakness, not cruelty. I made choices that came from both. Take care of yourself. Take care of your family. And maybe sometimes, remember that there was one person from your past who finally learned to see what you were worth. Greg, P.S. I never told you this, but I was at your high school graduation. Sat in the back, left before the ceremony ended. I wanted to see you succeed, even if I couldn't be part of it. You looked proud and strong and completely self-sufficient. It was the first time I realized what we'd thrown away. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it in my jacket pocket. Drove home to my family, to the life I'd built without any help from the people who were supposed to love me first. That night, Leah found me in my study, staring at a photo of Eli from his recent soccer game. Rough day? She asked. Complicated day. I told her about the funeral, about Greg's letter, about the conversation with Mom. Do you think you'll stay in contact with her? Maybe. Not for her sake, but for mine. I think I need to understand the full story before I can really close that chapter. And what about Greg? How do you feel about his letter? I thought about that. Grateful, I think. Not for the apology, that's meaningless after 15 years. But grateful that he finally saw what his choices cost everyone, including himself. Does it change anything? It changes my understanding of what happened. Doesn't change the consequences, but it fills in some blanks. Over the next few months, I found myself talking to Mom occasionally. Brief calls, always scheduled through the prison, always with clear boundaries. We talked about Tyler's struggles, about Greg's final months, about the ripple effects of choices made 20 years ago. Slowly, I began to understand her side of the story. The fear of being alone after my father left, the pressure Greg had put on her, the way he'd systematically isolated her from friends and family who might have advised her differently. It didn't excuse her choices, but it explained them. And understanding, I realized, was different from forgiveness. I could see why she'd made the decisions she'd made without agreeing with them or welcoming her back into my life. You're handling this remarkably well, Dr. Morgan told me during one of our sessions. 5 years ago, the idea of speaking to your mother would have sent you into a panic. 5 years ago, I was still that abandoned kid inside, still looking for their approval, I said. Now I'm just a man trying to understand his past so he can build a better future. And what does that future look like? I smiled, thinking of Eli's latest school project, of Leah's promotion, of the foundation's upcoming expansion. It looks like everything I never knew I wanted when I was 14. 6 months after Greg's funeral, I made a decision that surprised even me. I arranged a video call with Mom, the first time I'd seen her face since that day in my office 7 years earlier. She looked older, grayer, but somehow more peaceful than I remembered. Prison had stripped away the desperation and manipulation, leaving behind something that looked almost like acceptance. You look good, she said when we connected. Happy? I am happy. Tell me about Eli. About Leah. About your life. So I did. Told her about Eli's soccer team, about Leah's work with homeless youth, about the foundation and the kids we were helping. Showed her pictures on my phone, shared stories about our daily routines, our weekend adventures, our plans for the future. She listened with the kind of attention I'd craved as a child, asking thoughtful questions, laughing at Eli's antics, crying when I told her about a particularly difficult kid we'd helped through the foundation. He looks like you did at that age, she said when I showed her a picture of Eli building a fort in our backyard. He's nothing like I was at that age, I replied. He's confident, secure, loved. He's everything I wasn't. Because you're giving him everything we didn't give you. Yes. We talked for an hour, and when it was over, I felt something I hadn't expected, peace. Not reconciliation, not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of closure that came from finally seeing each other clearly. Will you call again? She asked as our time ended. Maybe. When I'm ready. I understand. And Noah? Thank you. For letting me see who you became. It's more than I deserved. After we hung up, I sat in my study thinking about the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. From that 14-year-old boy with garbage bags to a 35-year-old man with a family, a business, and a foundation that was changing lives. The letter from Greg was still in my desk drawer, next to Mom's apology letter and that old photo from my high school graduation. Artifacts from a past that no longer defined me, but that had shaped me in ways I was finally beginning to understand. Eli knocked on my door, interrupting my thoughts. Dad? Mom says dinner's ready. Coming, buddy. As we walked to the kitchen together, Eli chattering about his day at school, I realized that this was what victory looked like. Not revenge or vindication or even forgiveness. Just the simple act of building something better than what came before, of choosing love over hurt, of creating the family you needed instead of waiting for the family that failed you. The abandoned 14-year-old would always be part of my story. But he was no longer the whole story. Now he was just the beginning, the first chapter in a much longer, much happier book that I was still writing, one day at a time. A year later, everything changed again. This time, it wasn't about the past reaching out to complicate my present. This time, it was about the future demanding decisions I'd never thought I'd have to make. I was in my office reviewing quarterly reports when Annika buzzed me with an unusual request. There's a young woman here to see you, she said carefully. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says she's your sister. My blood went cold. That's impossible. I don't have a sister. She says her name is Zoe Lewis. Says she's Greg's daughter from before he met your mother. I stared at the phone, trying to process this information. Greg had never mentioned another child. In all the years he'd lived with us, in all our recent conversations, he'd only ever talked about Brianna and Tyler. Send her in, I said finally. The young woman who walked into my office looked to be in her early 20s, with dark hair and nervous eyes that reminded me uncomfortably of Tyler. She carried herself with the careful posture of someone who'd learned not to take up too much space. Mr. Delgado? She said uncertainly. I'm Zoe. Zoe Lewis. I think we might be related. I gestured for her to sit. How exactly do you think we're related? Gregory Lewis was my biological father, she said, pulling out a folder of documents. I was given up for adoption when I was 3. Grew up with a different family, different name. I only started looking for my birth parents after I turned 18. She slid a birth certificate across my desk. Father, Gregory Lewis. Mother, Natalie Grant. Date of birth, 7 years before Greg had moved in with my mother. I found Greg about 6 months ago, Zoe continued. We just started getting to know each other when he got sick. He told me about you, about his other kids, about the family he'd built after giving me up. He never mentioned you to me. He was ashamed, she said simply. Said he'd made a lot of mistakes with his children, and I was the first one. Said he'd learned too late how to be a father. I studied her face, looking for traces of the man who'd tormented my teenage years. She had his eyes, but there was a vulnerability in them that Greg had never shown. What do you want from me, Zoe? I don't want anything, she said quickly. When Greg died, the funeral director gave me this. She pulled out an envelope with my name on it. Greg left letters for all his children. This one's yours. I took the envelope, recognizing Greg's handwriting. Inside was a longer letter than the one he'd given me at the funeral. Noah, if Zoe is reading this to you, it means she found the courage to contact you after I'm gone. I asked her to wait until after the funeral because I didn't want to complicate your grieving process with more family drama. Zoe is my daughter from when I was 26. I was married briefly to her mother, but we divorced when Zoe was 3. When Natalie told me she was moving across the country and wanted to put Zoe up for adoption, I was too proud and too angry to fight for custody. Convinced myself the baby would be better off without me, that adoption was the kindest option. Sound familiar? I spent 20 years telling myself I'd made the right choice. Then I met your mother and inherited you, and I had a chance to be a real father. Instead, I repeated the same pattern of abandonment, just with more steps. Zoe found me 6 months before I died. She's nothing like Brianna or Tyler or you, she's gentle, kind, unspoiled by my influence. She grew up with good people who loved her, and she turned out to be everything I could have hoped for in a daughter. I'm telling you this because she's alone now. Her adoptive parents died in a car accident 2 years ago, and she has no other family. She's working her way through college, struggling financially, but too proud to ask for help. I know you don't owe me anything. But maybe you owe her something. She's the only one of my children who didn't get damaged by my parenting, and she deserves better than being alone in the world. I'm not asking you to take care of her. I'm asking you to give her a chance to be part of something bigger than herself. To be part of the family you've built. She doesn't know I'm writing this. If you decide not to contact her, she'll never know I asked. Greg. I read the letter twice, then looked up at Zoe, who was watching me nervously. Did you know he was writing to me about you? She shook her head. He just said he'd left letters for his children and asked me to deliver them. I almost didn't come. Wasn't sure you'd want to hear from another member of Greg's family. Tell me about yourself, I said, settling back in my chair. Your adoptive parents, your life, what you're doing now. Over the next hour, Zoe told me her story. Adopted by a loving couple who'd been unable to have children of their own. Raised in a stable, supportive home in Oregon. Lost both parents in a drunk driving accident during her sophomore year of college. Now working multiple jobs to pay for her senior year while studying social work. I want to help kids in the system, she explained. Kids like I was, like you were. Kids who need someone to believe in them. The parallels to my own foundation work were impossible to ignore. Why social work specifically? Because I was lucky. I got placed with parents who loved me, who gave me every opportunity. But I met other kids in the system who weren't so lucky. Kids who aged out with nowhere to go, no one to fall back on. She paused. Kids like you were. I found myself studying her face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agendas. But Zoe radiated the same genuine care that I'd seen in Leah, in Alejandro, in all the people who'd chosen to help me over the years. Are you struggling financially? I asked directly. She flushed. I'm managing. Working at a coffee shop and tutoring on weekends. I'll graduate next semester. That's not what I asked. She sighed. Yes, I'm struggling. My parents' life insurance covered the funeral and some debts, but not much else. I'm about $8,000 short for my final semester. I've applied for loans, but with no cosigner and no credit history. What's your plan if you can't get the funding? Take a gap year. Work full-time, save up, try again next year. I made a decision that surprised even me. What if I paid for your final semester? Her eyes widened. I couldn't accept that. We barely know each other. We're family, I said, testing how the words felt. Complicated, damaged family, but family nonetheless. But why would you help me? Greg hurt you. I'm just another reminder of his mistakes. You're not Greg's mistake, I said firmly. You're the one good thing that came from his bad choices. And you're trying to help other kids like we were. That matters to me. Zoe started crying then, not the manipulative tears I'd seen from other family members, but genuine relief and gratitude. I don't know what to say. Say you'll let me help. And say you'll come to dinner this Sunday so you can meet my real family. That Sunday dinner was the beginning of something I hadn't expected, a genuine relationship with someone who shared my biology but not my trauma. Zoe fit into our family dynamic almost immediately, charming Eli with stories about her work and connecting with Leah over their shared passion for helping vulnerable populations. She's not like the others, Leah observed after Zoe left. No, she's not. She's what Greg's kids might have been if he'd been a different person. Over the following months, Zoe became a regular part of our lives. She finished her degree with honors, found a job at a local child welfare agency, and slowly built a new life in our city. Not because I was supporting her, after that first tuition payment, she insisted on being completely independent, but because she'd found something she'd been missing since her parents died, family. It's strange, she told me one evening as we watched Eli play in the backyard. I spent years wondering about my birth father, building up this fantasy of what he might be like. When I finally met Greg, he was nothing like I'd imagined. What had you imagined? Someone who regretted giving me up. Someone who'd spent 20 years wondering about me, hoping I was okay. Instead, I found someone who'd convinced himself he'd made the right choice and never looked back. Did that hurt? At first. But then I realized that his inability to love consistently wasn't about me. It was about him. And by the time I understood that, I'd already found something better. What's that? She gestured toward the house, where Leah was helping Eli with homework while music played in the kitchen. This. A family that chooses each other every day instead of just accepting biological obligations. 6 months after Zoe graduated, she brought me a proposal that would change the direction of our foundation forever. I want to start a program for siblings, she said, spreading documents across my desk. Kids who've been separated by the system, adoptees looking for biological family, families torn apart by circumstances beyond their control. What kind of program? Counseling, mediation, reunion services when appropriate. But also support for people who choose not to reunite. Help them understand that family isn't just about blood, it's about choice, commitment, and love. I read through her proposal, impressed by the depth of research and thought she'd put into it. This wasn't just about her own experience, she'd identified a real gap in services for people navigating complex family situations. This is brilliant, I said. But it's also personal for you. Everything we do at the foundation is personal, she replied. You started it because of your own experience. I want to expand it because of mine. What would you need to make this happen? Funding for 2 full-time counselors, office space, and a program coordinator. She paused. I'd like to be the coordinator. I looked at this young woman who'd walked into my office 8 months ago as a stranger and had somehow become one of the most important people in my life. She represented something I'd never thought possible, a positive connection to my complicated past. Let's do it, I said. The Sibling Reconnection program launched 6 months later, housed in a new wing of our foundation building. Zoe hired 2 excellent therapists and began developing relationships with adoption agencies, foster care systems, and family courts throughout the state. The program's first success story came just 3 months after launch, twin brothers who'd been separated at age 5 and reunited at 18 through our mediation services. Watching them meet for the first time in 13 years, seeing the joy and recognition and immediate bond between them, reminded me why this work mattered. Not every reunion goes that well, Zoe warned me afterward. Sometimes people are better off apart. Sometimes the fantasy of family is more appealing than the reality. Do you think that's true for us? I asked. Are we better together than we would have been apart? She considered this seriously. I think we found each other at the right time in our lives. If we'd met 10 years ago, when you were still angry and I was still searching for a father figure, it might not have worked. But now, when we both know who we are independently, we can choose to be family without needing each other to fill holes in our lives. That evening, I called Mom for our monthly conversation. We'd settled into a routine over the past year, brief calls where we shared updates about our lives without diving too deep into emotional territory. I met another one of Greg's children, I told her. His biological daughter from before you met him. There was a long pause. He never told me he had another child. He never told anyone. She was adopted as a baby. Is she? Is she like Brianna and Tyler? No. She's completely different. Kind, hardworking, genuine. She's working with our foundation now. That's wonderful, Mom said, and I could hear genuine happiness in her voice. I'm glad you found each other. Are you really glad? Or does it hurt to know that Greg had another child he never mentioned? Another pause. It hurts a little, she admitted. Makes me wonder what else he never told me. But mostly I'm glad you have family who choose to be in your life because they want to be, not because they need something from you. As my 38th birthday approached, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. From abandoned teenager to successful businessman to unexpected big brother to someone I'd never known existed. Leah planned a small dinner party with our chosen family, Alejandro and Daniela, Zoe, a few close friends from the foundation. As we sat around our dining room table, Eli telling elaborate stories about his soccer team while everyone laughed, I felt a profound sense of completeness. This wasn't the family I'd been born into, but it was the family I'd built. Not through obligation or manipulation or guilt, but through choice and commitment and love. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and Eli was asleep, I sat in my study updating the foundation's annual report. We'd helped over 800 young people transition to independence, facilitated 57 sibling reunions, and prevented countless others from making the same mistakes that had defined my childhood. Zoe knocked on my door, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Working late on your birthday? Just finishing the annual report. Wanted to include the numbers from your program. She handed me a coffee and sat in the chair across from my desk. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever regret that it took us this long to find each other? I considered the question. No. I think we found each other exactly when we were supposed to. You needed to become who you are without Greg's influence, and I needed to build this life before I could appreciate having a sister who actually wants to be part of it. A sister, she repeated softly. I like how that sounds. Me too. As she left to go home to her own apartment, her own life that she'd built independently but chosen to interweave with ours, I realized something that would have seemed impossible when I was 14 years old sleeping in that park. Family wasn't about the people who were supposed to love you but didn't. It was about the people who chose to love you even when they didn't have to. And that kind of family, the kind built on choice rather than obligation, was stronger than any biological bond could ever be. The abandoned 14-year-old boy was still part of my story. But now he was just the opening chapter in a much larger, much happier book. A book that was still being written, one choice at a time, one day at a time, one act of love at a time.